what do you make then of people who push back and say it's a nice thing to say, but Biden is saying that knowing that it's not a possibility, one, because of Netanyahu, and two, because there has been this encroachment into Palestinian territory to an extent that it seems impossible. The experts seem to say it's next to impossible to imagine what a contiguous kind of a nation state would even look like at this point.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I dwell in possibilities. I don't want to keep going back to Biden, but man, he's been there 50 years, Brianna. 50, half of a century, 3/4 of the life of the state of Israel. The Foreign Relations Committee chairman, vice president for 8 years, president for 3. I'm someone who believes the proof is in the pudding. Show me the results. Is anything better in the Middle East than it was 50 years ago? It is exactly the same. We've wasted hundreds of billions of dollars, thousands of American lives, tens of thousands of Palestinian lives, thousands of Israeli lives. There's no more freedom in the entire region. There's more, if anything, there's less stability, more oppression, more misery. You know what? The proof is in the pudding, and I'm disgusted by it. And I think Netanyahu has to go. I think he is bad for the state of Israel. The settlement policy, a big part of the problem. I do envision a Palestinian state with Jewish people living in it, just as there's a Jewish state with Muslim Palestinians living in it. I think that would be healthy to have a shared, if you will, responsibility. And I think it's time for the entire world. I want to work with the Chinese to establish a Palestinian state. I think one of the biggest problems, believe it or not, Brianna, is since there's no other democracy in the Middle East other than Israel right now, I don't know if the Gulf nations and all the dictatorships and kingdoms are going to want to help create a state in which there will be free and fair elections and self-determination. Think about that. Because if it happened for the Palestinians, others around the whole region are going to say, well, gosh, we want the same thing. So that's going to be one of the biggest impediments. But if we don't try, Israel will never be safe. And of course, Palestinians will never have any hope. And that is not a way to live.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but given the repeated long-term and stated commitment of these states to a Palestinian state, the fact that Saudi Arabia has stopped its normalization, its very profitable normalization with Israel, and the negotiations the United States has been doing in that regard because of its support, its people's support of Palestine, the fact that after having waged war on Yemen for all of these years, it is now weirdly standing on the same side because Palestine is such a uniting issue in the region. Obviously, so many Palestinian refugees live in these surrounding countries, not by choice, but because they were forced out by the creation of Israel in 1948. It is, if anything, the thing that seems to be uniting various religious groups and political disputes across the region like almost nothing else. But to stay just on this subject a little bit, because I want complete clarity, sure. I want to ask you if you see the value in there being religious pluralism and ethnic pluralism within Israel and within a future Palestinian state. And living in the United States of America, which has the second largest Jewish population, and frankly, after the events of October 7th, demonstrably the safest Jewish population in the world, why does there need to be a two-state solution as opposed to a one-state solution that is genuinely democratic and that genuinely invests the same rights and privileges to both Arab, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish citizens?
Well, first, let me also say one thing about the Arab nations, which have done very little to help the Palestinian cause other than talk. Very, very little. In fact, when I was last in Saudi Arabia, I had to make some calls for them to reestablish paying their commitments to the East Jerusalem hospital. Over decades, the Palestinian cause, they would elevate when it was helpful to them, but then they'd forget about it. If there was really a will in the Arab world, the Middle East, to establish a Palestinian state, it could have been done decades ago and should have been. And it takes willing nations.
How can you say? I really don't want to debate this. One, because I'm not an expert in the history of the region, but even my cursory knowledge. I mean, they all went to war over trying to have a Palestinian state. How can you say? And they're hosting millions of Palestinian refugees and have done so for years. So it starts to sound a little bit like you're making the argument that so many conservatives make, which is to say nobody wants Palestinians anyway. the fact that Egypt won't let them be ethnically cleansed through the Rafah Gate is a demonstration of how horrible this population is. I mean, can you see how that's what this is starting to sound like?
But I respect you. That's not what it sounds like for me at all. I'm telling you the historical truth. The Arab world has not done much to actually create Palestinian safety, security, and self-determination. And I'm telling you why. Because self-determination equals freedom, which equals a risk to their own kingdoms. It's just the truth, Brianna. That is absolutely the truth. And that's been very underappreciated undercurrent of, I think, why there hasn't been a state created, because America wants a democratic state, and I think Israel does too, because they believe, most of us believe, democracy usually yields a government that is the most reasonable with which to work, not terrorists. On the other hand, none of the other Arab states want that because freedom is a risk to themselves. That's the truth. I don't know why that sounds like a weird talking point.
Well, because
that's historically accurate.
It's against what they are quite explicitly stating, but we don't really have to litigate that. I don't think that's really in front of people.
I'm sharing some news that maybe people are not aware of, and that is the truth. They don't want a free and self-determination.
Okay.
They don't want self-determination.
But to get back to this question, because I would argue that the Jewish state has done not only not very much to help there being a Palestinian state, but has aggressively and against international law worked to thwart the existence of a Palestinian state, as has the United States of America and its Western allies. So the question on the table is, why not a one-state solution? We're Americans. We're proud of living in a religious and racial pluralistic society, a nation of immigrants.
I'll tell you very simply. You know, I'm a Jewish person, and I do know history. And the fact is, Israel has been attacked since the very founding of the country in 1947, 1948. I think you know that. I'm sure everybody else knows that. Constantly attacked. This is well before settlements, well before anything else. This is the earliest lines of the state. Constantly attacked. No one even talks about it. Bus bombings, terrorist bombings, and the PLO killings at the Munich Olympic. Well, if I can just,
sure,
you can talk, or you can let me talk. I mean,
I'm
trying to express something that's true, and I'm really getting tired, frankly, of progressives not having any willingness to open their hearts to a whole nother people's history that I think is really important. And it's this: there are 200 Christian majority nations in the entire world. There are 140 Muslim majority nations in the entire world. There is one Jewish majority nation in the entire world. One. And why? Because 6 million of people of my faith, just because we pray from the Old Testament and not the New, were murdered. And my family came to America because they were escaping pogroms because they were being murdered. And now Jewish people are being attacked because they're Jewish. There's one country, Brianna. I don't understand why progressives do not understand that we are the underdog too. We have been for world history. And I think it's high time, frankly. This is really important to me.
Yeah, sure.
This is really important. I don't look like someone who needs any affection or support or protection, probably. I look like a white man, right? Well, let me tell you, people of my faith are being attacked, and they have been for world history, including 6 million of us killed in the Holocaust, including family members of mine, I'm sure, and pogroms that forced my family away. And now we're subject to sickening, vile anti-Semitism every day. One country. All we're saying is one country of the people of our faith to seek refuge in. And if you have one country that now combines millions of Palestinians, there's no more Jewish country in the world. And if America could have said, you know what? When the first boats left the Holocaust and came to this country, that we would have accepted them, maybe a different story. But Brianna, there is no place for Jewish people to go. And I would just ask that you open your heart.
Yeah.
But let me just finish.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were finished.
Ask you to open your heart to what it's like to not look like someone who maybe needs some help. But let me tell you, speaking for millions of Jewish people around the world right now, I think it's really offensive that progressives have totally forgotten history and what the misery of being Jewish has been for generations and generations and generations, for reasons that I do not really understand, but is real. So please, don't let that progressive love stop at my door. Well, okay.
I'll help you understand. For one, Representative Phillips, strikes me as a little ironic that you're going to say to me in my face as a Black American who doesn't have the option of someone that the United Nations and the international community having intervened on my behalf to create an entire country for my people who have zero options of some place to flee, who have been living in an apartheid state of our own in the United States of America, which has the 25% of the world's prison population that was disproportionately filled with my people, who was reported this week, substantively make all of the paint and slave labor products in the United States of America so we can compete with China and the rest of the world. The idea that you're looking at me and saying that I don't have empathy and can't open my heart to the psychic
I said
idea.
Progressive, Brianna, I do have empathy. That's what I'm asking for.
I am a progressive, so I'm speaking to you as a progressive, but also as a Black progressive. I have enormous empathy. Wait a minute. I have enormous empathy for the reasons why Jewish people want a Jewish state. I talk about this on the podcast a lot. There is a big part of me that says, oh, I get it, because I do not feel safe in the United States of America, not just me as an individual, but statistically as an aggregate. There's not a metric in the world that you can look at that says that this is a good place for Black Americans to be, that Black Americans are faring well in the United States of America. And I take your point, but it's also true that I know you and I are sitting here as two people who are not Christian in a predominantly Christian state. And there are Christians in America who make this very similar argument about America that it seems to me many people make about Israel, which is, oh, this is a Christian nation. And if immigration trends change and suddenly it does not become as much of a Christian nation, that we should rig the immigrant population to maintain the national character of the United States of America. We call that Christian nationalism, and we think that that's a bigoted principle and that we should not be picking and choosing who comes to this country to maintain some kind of ethnic or religious character that benefits the existing majority. We say, as Americans, we value pluralism and that every kind of person brings their own benefit and that we should protect the least of these and have laws that protect minorities because we value being a nation where minorities can be saved. Not that we have to rig the system so that we are majorities so that we can then dominate over the rest, right? So it strikes me as much as I empathize. When you tell the story of Jewish ships full of Jewish people after the Holocaust being turned away, I've spoken at length on this podcast about how disgusted I was to discover that Otto Frank and Frank's application was turned away and how close they came to be able to immigrate to America. I'm disgusted by it. But the question is, why should the actions of an anti-Semitic America and an anti-Semitic Europe be paid for by the people of Palestine who had absolutely nothing to do with the horrors of the Holocaust?
I mean, Brianna, first, let me strike at the heart of what you just said earlier, which is my empathy for Black America and the long tail of slavery that is so abhorrent and so visible and so obvious that I cannot believe we have not repaired that injustice. I want to honor that and acknowledge that. If anything, I'm telling you, I empathize with that. I was asking for mutual empathy, and I don't know if you just shared it with me, but I think you did. But you just asked a question of something that is just, it's just so historically inaccurate. Israel has been attacked because it's a Jewish state for decades. Now, Netanyahu's a different story. I'm not going to support him. What's happening right now is abhorrent, and his policies are abhorrent. It's true. And you can imagine it's not an easy thing to say for someone like me, but it is true. And I'm bold and I'm being honest and I understand. I cannot tolerate seeing this any longer. But Israel has been attacked since the day it was established by the free world after the Holocaust. It was attacked by its neighbors and they survived.
That's like saying that American settlers were attacked by Native Americans because they were white or because they were Christian.
Oh, boy, Brianna, holy moly, boy. I'm telling you. I got to tell you, I'm expressing empathy for Palestinians, for Muslims, for Black Americans. I'm not feeling what I'm surprised, to be honest with you, and I'm offended.
What is surprising about this, Representative?
I'm just surprised. I'm surprised by the lack. I just explained it. I'm surprised by the lack of empathy of progressives relative to the Jewish people and the state of Israel, not Benjamin Netanyahu.
What do you say, Dean Phillips, to the thousands and thousands of Jewish advocates for Palestinian rights who comprise organizations like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace? And people like, frankly, Bernie Sanders, I think, could go a little farther. He still won't say the word ceasefire, but he was arguing in front of Congress to actually have us follow our own laws and limit aid based on the humanitarian actions of Israel. This is not a issue on which Jewish people are all on one side or the other. I had
I'm on the side of peace,
Holocaust
Brianna.
historian from Dartmouth on a couple of weeks ago, talking about all of the different prongs of Zionism and how we have this revisionist history of what it means to be a Zionist, and how many Jewish thought leaders from Albert Einstein all the way down were highly critical of the Zionist project precisely because they saw it as replicating the harms that were done to Jews in Europe on a new population. And that never again was supposed to mean never again for anyone. We're not talking about a historical record where Jewish people just decided to immigrate to the land of Palestine and live alongside. There were Jews, Arab Jews, that lived in Palestine since time immemorial. That's not the question. In peace and prosperity. The question is whether or not a land grant from a colonial power like the UK can be given because of guilt, much well-earned guilt, frankly, over the anti-Semitism and a refusal to accept the victims and the survivors of the Holocaust, and to offload the issue onto another part of the world. And as I'm sure you're aware, there was a conversation about whether or not Israel should be located in Africa. But for various reasons, and I highly recommend people go back to listen to our episode with the Zionist historian of Zionism, it ended up being in Palestine. And so that is a kind of original sin that I see as very akin to
where the Jewish people originated. I mean, that's the whole
fine.
point.
That's fine.
That's fine. That's the whole point. That's where the Jewish people originated.
You cannot have there are Ukrainian Jews and Russian Jews and Polish Jews and French Jews and British Jews and Jewish people who have been living in Europe for centuries and decades, centuries and centuries. And on the other hand, you have Palestinians who are 80 years old, who are clutching the keys to the houses that they grew up in. They're on the other side of the wall, who have been told that they cannot go home because my Jewish friend who's born in Philadelphia gets to have a right of return, but they do not. Like that is the injustice that we're talking about here. If we're talking about moral weight and what was deserved after the Holocaust, you have my utmost sympathy. You have my utmost empathy. But the question isn't what is owed. It is what is owed from whom. And why is it that Europe gets to offload its own responsibilities? The Jewish state wasn't in Poland. I bet you a whole lot of people who had been chased out of their lands and put into concentration camps would have loved to feel safe in a land where they spoke the language and they had their own community and they had their own belongings and the like. But this is
the only reason they were living there, Brianna, is because they were forced there by the Tsar. It's hard to listen to, but go ahead. I'm just, I'm offended,
I don't need to belabor
I'm listening.
I mean, that's fine. And we can all sit here and be offended. But the question now isn't really, and it's a moot point because in large part, Israel won this battle. They have established a country and nobody's...
You're attacking me in a funny way because I'm telling you, what's so interesting is I'm not sure you heard what I said. I'm a Jewish man running for president of the United States of America who wants to recognize the state of Palestine. I believe that we should invest in the state of Palestine. If I could just say what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to be a voice of decency, of compassion, of reason in the absence of it. And if you look at the other people running for president, Brianna, my goodness, I'm telling you, I'm appalled. I want this to end. It should have never started. And yes, Hamas is a horrific, despicable terrorist organization that needs to be eliminated. Benjamin Netanyahu should not be, I don't think, the prime minister of Israel moving forward. And I pray that Israelis make a change. Israel is the only multicultural, multi-faith, free country in the entire Middle East. As Richie Torres says, it's the only place where he, as a gay man, could be alive, let alone thrive. And look I'm trying to be decent. Okay, Brianna, I'm trying to be compassionate and decent.
Gay marriage isn't legal in Israel.
I'm sorry?
Gay marriage is not legal in Israel. And interfaith marriage is not legal in Israel. People have to fly to Cyprus to get married if you want to marry a Christian or a Muslim or anybody else. I mean, let's just be honest about what we're doing here.
Entire Middle East. Okay.
I mean, let's just the question. The reason we're circling around. I appreciate that. Frankly, yes, you are. I think closer to my politics than Joe Biden for sure. And that's what we're talking about in the Democratic primary.
Brianna, Brianna, I would love to continue the conversation. I was just notified actually that something serious just happened. I've got to...
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll let you go, but I just do want to get this out. My question was about why you don't support a one-state solution. That's why we're here, because the reality is that the
Brianna,
elected officials
first of all, I seriously have to go. Let me tell you this. I would love to have this conversation because I like to learn, and I like to understand your perspective on it. I'd like to listen to others too. I'm not so hardened in my heart on anything that thoughtful perspectives from other people can't change my mind. I'd like to listen and learn to you. I have my own opinions. I did not mean to be antagonistic at all. In fact, I'm suffering like a lot of people right now. And by the way, I want to honor yours.
Yeah.
I gotta go, and I'm so sorry, but I'd love to continue the conversation on this subject and
no
so
problem.
many others.
I really do appreciate your time. Maybe we can get you back with some other people, with some Jewish progressives that can maybe help clarify the position here, who are much more expert on this issue. But thank you so much. I really did enjoy this conversation.
That's what I wanted to let you know. So I appreciate you too, Brianna. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the spirited conversation. Hopefully we can get him back with maybe either the Zionist scholar that I was referencing before, or someone like Katie Halper, Aaron Mate, or Max Blumenthal, who can get more into the history with him. Maybe somebody with a little bit of a softer touch. Let's brainstorm what that could look like and what that could be. But I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and saw a different side of the candidate that we've been seeing in these 7-minute rare MSNBC interviews and the like. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. You can always get more Bad Faith at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. As always, take care of yourselves and keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.